Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Aurora Shweta. I manage Project Maverick at LawSeco, which is an initiative to make great legal resources freely available online for CLAT preparations. Through these webinars, the attempt is to assist you with your CLAT preparations. We did GK, current affairs with Abhinav earlier, and it was a massive hit. It spoke about India and Nepal border dispute, and now we're talking about the session will focus primarily on India-China, relation, India-China border disputes, role of India in BRICS, all those things. So Abhinav would like to take you through it. Abhinav is from NLS at Bangalore, NLSU, and he just so yeah. So over to you, Abhinav. Please take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi guys, so in today's video, I'd like to talk to you, in today's lecture actually, I'd like to talk to you about India-China relations. So if you've been following the news somewhat, you would be aware that there is tension brewing at our borders with China, okay? Now, obviously this topic is majorly going to cover that particular instance or that particular episode at the border. But I think it's a little better if we understand the sort of context in which it is taking place. Is this the only border dispute that we have with China? So if there are other disputes, what is the history of such disputes with China, right? So I think if you're able to look at it that way, I think it'll be better for you guys to understand. So most of what I'll be talking to you about for the next 10-15 minutes is not relevant in the sense that it probably won't come in your CLAT paper, but it's very important to have a historical background to this current conflict, and it'll help you to really understand what the sort of situation that we're seeing at the border today. Okay. So this is basically the map that we should be concerned about. Okay, so on the western side, there is Pakistan administered Kashmir, okay, POK. We might do a separate video on that altogether. But today what we're going to discuss is about this area called Aksai Chin. And another important area which we'll be looking at is Arunachal Pradesh, okay. So India and China have been at loggerheads with respect to the boundary disputes pertaining to these areas, okay. So as of today, the actual control of the Aksai Chin rests with China. So China is the de facto controller of Aksai Chin. And at the same time, the de facto control of Arunachal Pradesh rests with India. Okay, so this is the modern theater of conflict, not conflict actually, the modern theater of friction between these two countries. Okay. So let's just kind of try to understand. Let me just break up the borders and the sort of disputes that we have with China in front of you. Okay, so once we're able to identify the areas in which China and India are fighting and exchanging blows at the border, then you'll be able to understand this, what I'm going to say a little better. Okay, so you can divide the India-China border dispute into three particular sectors. Okay, first is the western sector. This, I would say, is the western sector with regards to Aksai Chin and this particular area here. Okay, so this western sector in India shares about around approximately 2,000 kilometers long border with China. Okay, now it is between the Union Territory, which was recently declared as Ladakh was declared as Union Territory. It lies between the UT of Ladakh and the Xinjiang province of China. So if you've been following the news, Xinjiang is an autonomous region in China which has a majority Uyghur Muslim population, and China has been accused of massive human rights violation by putting these Uyghurs into, let's say, sort of reformation camps, which are nothing sort of internment camps, and it is alleged that China is trying to severely alter the demographics of that area and to, let's say, sort of tame these autonomous citizens. Okay, so it is in this sector that there is a territorial dispute over this area called Aksai Chin. Okay, so here is the Xinjiang province of China, and here you have the Ladakh Union Territory. Okay, so the issue is that so most of the disputes that we have with China is because of the sort of nature of civilizations that we have. Okay, so there's this term called Eurocentrism. I don't know if you guys have heard about it or not. Basically, so post the era of colonization, most of the studies that have happened in the world, most of the narratives that have emerged throughout the world have a very European centricity to those narratives. Okay, they don't study the native societies, they don't study the native culture, but they try to superimpose the sort of notions that they already have of the intellectual culture in Europe. Okay, so this idea wherein everything is studied from a European prism is known as a Eurocentric idea. Okay, so if you look at the European states, these are modern capitalist states, whereas for which the notion of boundary was very important, right? However, if you look at the sort of civilizations that India and China have, we are both of us are one of the great five civilizations, the other being Mesopotamia, etc. Okay, so we go about 5,000 years back in history. Now, these such civilizations, obviously, it have not had borders. Okay, so it is said that the idea of borders itself is very wrong, because if you have such civilizations that have flourished for 5,000 years, and there has been, let's say, cultural interaction between these civilizations, people to people interaction, there has been trade for millennia. Now, you obviously can't have borders, but what you can have is transition zones. Okay, so transition zones is basically once you see the effects of one culture diminishing and the effects of the other culture picking up. But that's how it should have ideally been. But another sort of world order that we live in today, referred to as the Westphalian world order, we have strict demarcations or boundaries. Now, if you try to demarcate boundaries between such old civilizations, obviously there are bound to be certain clashes. Okay, so during the British rule in India, two borders between British India and China were agreed. So they said that let's talk about two different lines. The first line was the Johnson's line. It was proposed in 1865. Now, as per Johnson's line, the Aksai Chin area that we just saw, which is a disputed area, which China has de facto control of, under the Johnson's lines agreement that we had, it would obviously lie in Kashmir or Ladakh, and therefore India's claim will be legitimate. However, so initially China didn't say much, China didn't oppose, but later on they realized the strategic importance of this area and they started reneging on their agreement. So later on in 1893, the British said, okay, let's enter into another agreement wherein they demarcated the McDonald line. So McDonald was the person who was some sort of a foreign representative of the British Empire to China and a British envoy to China, and they sort of came up to they sort of came up with this line called the McDonald line, which places Aksai Chin under China's control. So China never really accepted this. Okay, and it was this stayed in a, let's say, it stayed in the gray area. China neither accepted nor denied. Okay, however, what the situation is that India says that since British India and China had an explicit agreement with regards to Johnson's line in 1865, and the current Indian state is a direct successor of British India, and we say that the Johnson's line is the correct line, and therefore according to the Johnson's line, Aksai Chin is a part of India. However, the China says no, at a later date, we had entered into discussions about the McDonald line. Therefore, the McDonald line would be the so-called border with China. Okay. So at present, the situation is that both the countries have border disputes. We are unable to solve these border disputes. There have been agreements over the years. There have been signals that both sides want to sort of, let's say, demarcate the borders, exchange maps, etc. But obviously, the Chinese side is not very excited about it. So currently, the situation on ground is that there is a line of actual control, which is separating the Indian areas of Ladakh from Aksai Chin. And this is concurrent with the Chinese Aksai Chin claim line. Okay, so the difference between the border line, the line of control, and the claim line is, okay, so basically the border is what was drawn on the maps. Okay, and then the claim line is what China actually claims. So China, according to the Chinese, so what we see, the sort of maps that we've studied as kids while growing up, does not reflect what actually is the reality on the ground, where it reflects India's claim line. So we claim that Aksai Chin is ours, we claim that Pakistani occupied Kashmir is ours. Therefore, when you see Indian maps, you see those areas falling under the Indian state. Similarly, if you see maps, national maps from China and Pakistan, you will see that their claim lines are different and they also claim both these areas. Okay, so claim lines are theoretical lines, and it's a very odd provision that ideally this should happen. Now, line of actual control is basically what the ground reality is, how much area is dominated by certain countries' forces, and what is the sort of actual on-ground border, or not border actually, to be technically correct, not what is the on-ground situation. That the line of control is a true reflection of that. Okay, 1 second. Then this is the area that we've talked about. This is the Western sector. We will study more about the Western sector in detail when I come to the current crisis, because the current crisis as it is unfolding is primarily located in the Western sector. Okay, so after the Western sector, then there comes the middle sector, in which India shares a 6.5 kilometers long boundary with China, and it runs along the watershed from Ladakh to Nepal. Okay, so Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand touch this border with Tibet, which India in 1954 in the Funchal Agreement accepted as a part of China. Okay, so in this area there is not a lot of disagreement. There was some disagreement with regards to Sikkim, but when Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji went to Beijing in 2003, China accepted Sikkim to be a part of India's sovereign territory. So we really don't have any sort of dispute in the middle sector. Okay. Now, the third area where we have considerable dispute with China is the eastern sector. And in this sector, India shares a very long boundary, that is 1140 kilometers boundary with China. So this area starts from the eastern limit of Bhutan and it ends at the tri-junction of India, Tibet, and that's the sort of 1100 kilometers area which is referred to as the eastern sector. Okay. So here China says that the McMahon line, which is the line that exists here, is an illegal line, and it says that this is unacceptable because the McMahon line was decided by British India and Tibet in 1900. So so there was a conference or convention held in Shimla in 1940 where representatives of the British Indian state were there. Then you had representatives from both China as well as Tibet. So the representatives from China staged a walkout. They were not happy with the sort of demarcation proposed by the McMahon line because according to it, Arunachal Pradesh would fall in India. Okay. But the Tibetans said, okay, we are fine with this. We don't mind Arunachal Pradesh being a part of India. Okay. So the Chinese reneged on this. They never accepted this. They walked out of the agreement. So China never accepts this line in the Northeast. So China, if you look at China, so they always claim that Arunachal Pradesh and Tawang region is basically southern Tibet. It's an extension of Tibet. And therefore they say that Arunachal Pradesh is a part of India. I think long time ago, if let's say if you're a resident of Arunachal Pradesh and you wanted to visit China, they would give you stapled visas just to egg the Indian government and say, these are our citizens only. Why do we need to give them any sort of visas? So they gave them very informal stapled visas. Okay. But that was countered by the Indian intelligence because then it started sneaking a lot of spies into China through that route. So China also learned it the hard way and they sort of recognized Arunachal as being a sovereign, being under the sovereign control of India. Okay. So this is the sort of border dispute that we see today. Okay. And so this is the background for the border dispute. Okay. So now let's look at how we arrived at this situation. Let's also look at the 1962 war in a little detail. What happened? Why is there such a massive distrust between these two countries? And after independence, our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, tried to follow a policy of appeasement towards China. Now, if you've studied history in detail, you would have understood that when India got independent in 1947, we were in dire states. We didn't have much. And obviously, no PM would want to afford a war at that point of time. Right? Because there were a lot of internal pressures at itself to face at that time, and we didn't want to be engaged in any sort of an external conflict. Okay. So in 1954, Jawaharlal Nehru ji and the Chinese premier Zhou Enlai entered into an agreement known as the Funchal Agreement. So broadly, what the Funchal Agreement talked about was, it later on was a sort of principle that was adopted in the non-alignment movement. So the Funchal Agreement, basically, the crux of the Funchal Agreement was that both sovereign countries should not interfere in the affairs of each other. You should not interfere in each other's affairs. So this was the direct mention of the sort of conditions in the Panchsheel Agreement. What also happened on the side is that British India had traditionally enjoyed ties with Tibet, right? We had trading rights, etc. But Jawaharlal Nehru ji decided that okay, we will give up these trading rights and let's try to appease China. Let's accept the fact that let's accept that Tibet has been a part of China and let's accept Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. So on the sides, a little history about Tibet is, so whenever there has been a strong kingdom in China, Tibet has been a part of China. Okay, Tibet has been under China. Whenever there has been a weak dynasty in thousands of years of Chinese history, it's only then that Tibet has retained some sort of autonomy. Okay, so whenever there has been a strong central government in China over thousands of years, Tibet has firmly been a part of China. Okay, so Nehruji accepted this. Right? However, the other issue is that so the western sector disputes, eastern sector disputes, please remember middle sector disputes also existed at that point of time. It's only in 2003 when Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji had gone to China that they had given up their claim in the eastern sector and said that we recognize India's sovereignty over Sikkim. So Nehru ji at that point of time in the parliament, he was really criticized, and they said that why have you negotiated, as in it wasn't a negotiation with China, and the political opposition was that you basically surrendered to China. You didn't get anything from China. You could have bargained about, let's say, Aksai Chin. You could have bargained about Sikkim, or forget that, you could have bargained about Arunachal Pradesh, but that didn't happen. So after that, the political climate in India was a little charged, and Nehruji also had to take some proactive steps, right? And so there are allegations that China has made that with regard, so that so India had started, let's say, sort of developing relations with Tibet. They helped Dalai Lama, who is the spiritual head of Tibet, escape into India, who now resides in Himachal Pradesh. Then China also accused India of helping CIA to train insurgents and agents in the Darjeeling Hill region, and that was what was known as Nehruji's forward policy. So basically, what Nehruji did was he realized that Chinese have constructed a highway in the Aksai Chin region, and initially Nehruji had said that Aksai Chin region is not really that important because not even a blade of grass grows in that region. But after realizing that Chinese have constructed a highway there, Nehruji moved in Indian forces into the Aksai Chin region, and this is known as Nehru's forward policy. Now, obviously, the Chinese got angry with this, and one thing led to another, and then we had the 1962 Indochina War. And it is during the 1962 Indochina War that the idea of the LAC gained prominence. Okay, so there are documented exchanges between Nehruji and Zhou Enlai, who was the Chinese prime minister at that point of time. Let me try to read it out in one of the other slides that I have somewhere else. Okay. So after the war, Zhou Enlai wrote to Nehruji and said that the Chinese have unilaterally declared a ceasefire, and we have moved 20 kilometers behind what we consider to be the line of actual control. So the reply that Nehruji gave was that what is this absurd way of thinking? First you invade a country, first you come into a country, then you come in 60 kilometers, and then you say that we are being nice and we are retreating 20 kilometers. So we are not stupid children that we will think that this is a magnanimous step taken by China. So this is the first time that Zhou Enlai talked about the line of actual control. Okay. So currently, if you look at what the line of actual control is, it is a disputed boundary between India and China. Okay, so as I've told you before, it is divided in three sectors: Western, Middle, and Eastern sectors. Okay, now India says that this LAC is around 3,500 kilometers long. However, China says that this LAC is only 2,000 kilometers long. Okay, so why does China say it's only 2,000 kilometers long? Because line of actual control would only make sense in an area where the dispute hasn't been settled. Okay, so if there is proper demarcation of borders, if there is proper exchange of maps, then there is no need for the line of actual control to be there, right? Because line of actual control has no legal backing. It is basically an understanding between two countries and the armies of two countries that to prevent any sort of escalation, let's not cross this line. Okay, so therefore China says that aisa issue hai nahi, Aksai Chin वैसे भी हमारा है, Arunachal भी हमारा है, so there is no concept of line of actual control. Okay, so in the eastern sector, in the middle sector, there is actually not a lot of dispute with regards to the line of actual control. Indian understanding of the line of actual control and the Chinese understanding of the line of actual control is pretty much the same. There is not so much of an issue. Okay. However, the issue arises in the western sector, and that's basically what has triggered the current crisis. Okay. So with regards to let's say the LAC. So I remember I told you that China says that the McMahon line is also an illegal line because the representatives of Tibet had walked out. So why do we respect China's thoughts and why do we engage with China on the McMahon line? Because in a letter sent to Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru by the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, he had said that in the eastern side, the boundaries or the border between India and China coincides with the so-called McMahon line. So he said that while we do not legally say that the McMahon line is fine, but he said that in the eastern sector we really don't have a problem because we think that the McMahon line and our perception of the line of actual control is in line with each other. Okay, So now there is this former Foreign Secretary of India, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon. I suggest that you read his book called Choices inside the makings of Indian foreign policy. Therein he gives all these details, and therein he said that what Chinese have very surreptitiously done is whenever they talk about the line of control, they only describe them as let's say in general terms on maps, and they always mention maps not to scale or these lines not to scale, so that there can obviously be some sort of a room for reinterpretation of these lines at a later date, as and when suited to the Chinese empire. Another problem that Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon highlights, um, 1 second, is that line of control according to China is basically some random dots on a map, and the Chinese can connect these dots in whatever manner they like, right? So today, if the Chinese think that this area is strategically important to us, they will connect two random dots and say, no, this falls within our line of control, right? So obviously you can't, let's say, sort of negotiate with a country which has such a loose understanding of the line of actual control. This is obviously a deliberate ploy, because they obviously want to manipulate it at a later date. Okay. um, so like in the 1950s and in the 1960s, India had always rejected the idea of the LAC. Okay. And so like a lot of disputes persisted, and fast forward to 1988. This is in the backdrop of the, so in the Samdarchu region, the Chinese forces had let's say invaded, not invaded, but their troops have crossed over, just like they had crossed over in Doklam, and just like they have crossed over today. So this is in 1987, and it is in this backdrop that Rajiv Gandhi ji went to China in 1988. So when they went to China in 1988, this was a decisive shift in the India-China relations, and let's say it's a lot of talks opened up after this period. So they said that there should be a general understanding with regards to how we will demarcate the borders, and some broad principles are adopted, which said that we will take into consideration the opinion of the people that are affected by this. Then we will also take into consideration the sort of practical difficulties that you have. So the thing is, with the opinion, so if you look at, and obviously taking the opinion of the people is very important, right? Because asking the people in Arunachal Pradesh whether they want to be a part of India or China is a question that we really need to ask them. We can't just unilaterally draw lines on the map and say, oh, from today Arunachal Pradesh is Chinese, or from today Arunachal Pradesh is Indian. You have to obviously respect the will of the people. Now the issue with this principle is in Aksai Chin, because there's nobody living in Aksai Chin, right? So this is one very interesting thing with regards to Aksai Chin. So it is reported, like I can't really cite sources, but like a former foreign secretary had said that some sort of an agreement between India and China so they had reached some sort of an agreement where China had said, let's approach this issue in a bundle package. Okay. China said that let's give us Aksai Chin and we will recuse ourselves from our claim on Arunachal Pradesh. So obviously, because if the opinion of the people was going to be taken, the people in Arunachal Pradesh would want to continue being in India. Everybody is going to want to be in India. Yeah, can you hear me, Shweta? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously the Indian state rejected this and said, no, we will talk about principles. What is this barter sort of agreement? We have a legitimate claim in both those regions. Okay. And the reason, so we talked about India-Nepal dispute in the last video, right? And the reason why our claim is better than Nepal's claim and why our claim is a lot different from Nepal's claim is that Nepal had not claimed the Lipu Lake area for the last 180 years, but India since independence has been claiming the Aksai Chain and the Arunachal Pradesh area, right? So therein our claim is better in the sense that since our formation, we have been saying that these areas are ours. Okay, so then this is what Rajiv Gandhi ji had achieved in China. Now fast forward to 1993. This is after the death of Rajiv Gandhi ji, when PV Narasimha Rao was the prime minister. In 1991, the Chinese premier had come to India, and therein they had reached a tacit understanding with regards to the on-ground situation. They realized that on ground for the last 30-40 years, the actual de facto control that each country exercises is decided by the line of actual control, right? So they had reached some sort of an agreement. And in 1993, when Narasimha Rao ji went to China, they came up with this peace and tranquility agreement. Okay. So the peace and tranquility agreement is the only reason why we see fist fights on our borders and we do not see gunshots. Okay, so within the Peace and Tranquility Agreement of 1993, both countries decided that there is no need for us to fight with each other. We don't need to fire bullets. We both are developing countries. There is no need for us to engage in large scale wars. Okay, and they said that let's try to, as much as possible, let's solve these disputes amicably. Okay, so this is the Peace and Tranquility Agreement. This is a very important agreement, so you should remember this fact that it was signed by Narasimha Rao ji. Okay, and in 1993 this was followed by another agreement in 1996 called the Military Confidence Building measures, which basically said stuff like no warplanes would fly within 10 kilometers of the line of actual control, and surveillance planes would also fly within 1 kilometer of the line of actual control. So such sort of confidence building measures were to be taken, and it looked like there is some sort of a thaw in India-China relationship, and we might be able to, let's say, have some sort of an arrangement. And then they also talked about, let's say, regular talks between special representatives by both the countries, and it was agreed that we will have a 3-stage process with regards to solving this border dispute. One second. Okay. So the first step was that there will be an agreement on the guiding principles and the political parameters whereby we will decide these disputes. The second was that there should be demarcation on the ground as per the agreement. And third was that there should be an exchange of maps. Okay. So now the first two conditions, that there is an agreement on the guiding principles, the Panchsheel had already happened in 1952, and those are obvious principles that every country would try to abide by, that you will not interfere in the internal matters of any sovereign country. Now, nobody can openly say that we want to interfere in the sovereign matters of an independent country. So that first principle is accounted for. Now, the second principle, which talks about demarcation on the ground, that has also happened broadly in all the sectors. Now, the third interesting thing and the third parameter was the exchange of maps. So for the middle sector, some, let's say, exchange of maps has been done. However, China, and that also at an informal level. Okay, so they haven't formally exchanged maps. And for the Western and the Eastern sector, China hasn't exchanged any of the maps. Okay. So one of the reasons that you could say why China is not doing this is because in 1990s, okay, both the countries had embraced liberalism. Both the countries were, let's say, competitive, and they were fairly close to each other in terms of a lot of indices like health indices, development, GDP, military strength, etc. Right? But since the 90s, China has massively and very decisively overtaken India, right? And every year, so India has also had a beautiful growth story. India is also an emerging power. India is stronger by the day. It's economically more powerful. It's military stronger. Vis-a-vis any other country in the world, India has always been bridging this gap of dissimilarity, right? But the only country with which this gap has been increasing over the years is China. Okay, so when India was growing at a stellar 6, 7, 8% GDP rate, China was also growing at a large pace. And there are certain things that work in the Chinese favor, in the sense that it's not a democracy. They don't have to take pleasing decisions, right? They can do things the way they want to. And therefore, you may criticize the Chinese model. You might say that they don't have any sort of freedom, but like, they have money, right? Like, freedom and money are not necessary. They don't work together. China really has the money to buy stuff. China's defense budget is 3 times our budget. So the sort of conventional superiority we hold over Pakistan, the sort of treatment China can also very clearly give to us, right? Because that's a sort of disparity between these two countries. Okay, so this is the broad historical background to this. And then in 2003, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when he had gone to China, China said, okay, we want to finish off our disputes in the middle sector, and they recognized Sikkim as a sovereign part of India. Then they also said that India and China are strategic partners, right? Because see, the thing is, in today's world, right, you can't have black and white relationships. If you look at India-China relationships, you can't do, obviously you can't have these countries fighting wars together, but you can't be complete permanent enemies and permanent friends, right? Because there are certain areas with regards to, let's say, negotiations in the World Trade Organization, negotiation on, let's say, making the world a more inclusive and a multipolar place. Okay, furthering multilateral discussions on multiple forums and talks on climate change, etc. So India and China obviously have to support each other there, but at the same time they are at loggerheads with each other with regards to the boundary disputes, etc. Right? So obviously there is a complex interdependence in this modern globalized world. So you can't have these situations. You can't have very rudimentary and easy solutions to any of the disputes that persist. Okay. So that's pretty much what happened till 2003. Then in 2015, Prime Minister Modi ji decided, and they tried to approach China and say that let's talk about our border disputes. But as we know, the gap between India and China is obviously broadening, and China blatantly declined. They said there is other stuff to talk about. Let's talk about more interesting stuff. Ye chhod do. Okay, so that's honestly what happened in around 2015. However, in 2017, along the sidelines, so 2017 is let's say around the time of the Doklam crisis, right? So India and China met along the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement discussions in Astana, okay? And India and China came up with the Astana Declaration. The major principle that was agreed was that India and China obviously will have disputes with each other. Both are emerging nations. Obviously, they have to balance their own interests. However, India and China should take particular care and ensure that small, let's say, and say that differences should not become disputes. Okay, this was the line that was used in the Astana Declaration in 2017, that differences should not become disputes. Okay, so now this is the background of the India-China relationship, and I hope you guys are fairly clear on where we stand, the sort of footing that we stand on with regards to China. Okay, so now let's come to the current issue, which is happening at the border. Now I want to, so there is this something that I want to say. I've read a lot of conflicting newspaper articles. There are certain articles which say that ab Delhi dur nahi hai, matlab according to them China to Delhi pahunch jayega. There are other articles which said that India ne laal aankh dikha diya China ko, bas China वापस जाने वाला है. So the truth obviously does not lie in any of these extremes. According to me and according to the sort of people that I believe that they're very honest about this, according to them, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Okay, so I appreciate it if you guys listen to this with a very open mind. Okay, because nobody really knows the truth. The government, the Indian government, has not really come out with some sort of explanation with regards to where exactly the Chinese troops are, what exactly the Indians are doing, because it'd be fairly stupid also for the government to tell the people the sort of negotiation strategies that they have. So the only things that we can talk about, so up till now what I've talked about is complete truth. Like that's how things have happened till 2017, 2020. Now what I'm going to talk about is slightly speculative because there are multiple people giving multiple opinions. So I've tried to collate and sift through the absolute extremes and try to present a picture in the middle for you guys. Okay, one second. So the current crisis that we are seeing unfold is in the western sector. So there has been an incident in the Nakula Pass in Sikkim as well, wherein a lieutenant apparently punched a major ranking officer of the Chinese People Liberation Army. But that's slightly different. I don't think there's a strategic issue with regards to that. I think those cross-border incursions are what Chinese usually keep on doing, right? Because some sort of power projection, some sort of, let's say, psychological effect they want to create on the Indian soldiers. So I don't want to link that to this, but that's an independent event that has happened in the eastern sector. The primary dispute that has currently happened is in the western sector, okay? And that is also related to this very interesting road. This road is called the DSDBO, okay? Darbok Shiok Daulat Beg Oldie Road, okay? 1 second, let me just remove these. Yeah, so this region is the Dubruk region, okay? And from this region, there is an isolated Indian post in Daulat Beg Oldie, okay? So obviously, to maintain supply lines, India wanted to construct this Daulat Beg Oldie road, and it has basically made a very nice hardtop road, which so obviously China has a problem with this because this is at the boundary line and this is at the LAC. The sort of issues that China has with this are very obvious, right? So the thing is, if this road didn't exist, then it would be really hard for the Indian army to move a lot of troops, to move heavy equipments, to move tanks, etc. to these regions. But now, since this road has been created, it's much easier for the Indian army to station troops, to provide equipment, to provide heavy weapons, etc. And therefore, China obviously has a problem. The interesting thing is that this is the sort of infrastructure development that China has been taking over the years, right? For example, in 1999, when India was engaged in a war with Pakistan, a lot of the forces from this area were moved to the eastern sector. Okay, what China surreptitiously did is that they constructed a 5-kilometer road along this area at that point of time. So it's not that India is unilaterally being the aggressor and taking out and developing infrastructure on its sides of the border. And frankly speaking, even if India is aggressively building infrastructure, I don't really see a problem, because this is the Indian side of the border and this is beyond the Chinese claim line as well, right? So this area is not the area that Chinese say is a disputed area. This area is firmly in the Indian territory where this road lies. Okay. So there are three major issues, three major, let's say, flashpoints in this dispute. First is the Fingers region in the Pangong Lake, where we've seen incursions. Then this area is known as the Hot Springs area, and there is a post here called the Kogra post. Here we've seen incursions, and then there is the Galwan River here, and obviously it flows through the Galwan Valley, and this is the third sort of flashpoint that we've seen. Okay. So this term has been used with regards to Pangong Lake finger area. Let me actually show you what these fingers are, right? So this is what the Pangong Lake looks like. And these are, so there are multiple mountain ridges that are running perpendicular to this Pangong Lake. And then there is a sort of a beach-like structure here. So each of these mountain ridges are referred to and called as fingers. Okay, so think of it as the knuckles in your palm, right? So let's say if there's a lake here, these knuckles are the ridges and these are the fingers. Okay, so this is finger 1, finger 2, finger 3, finger 4, right up to finger 8. Okay, so you have a general idea about how this labeling has been carried out, right? Now I'll explain to you what exactly is the position when we come to the dispute in the Pangong Tso region. Okay, so a lot of people are saying that China has there is a large Chinese presence in the Galwan Valley. Now this is interesting because Galwan Valley, if you let's say occupy the top and the higher ridges in the Galwan Valley, then the Brook Shok highway is just 1 kilometer from there, and you can directly see the highway, right? So let's say in terms of actual conflict, it is very easy for any forward position or any forward artillery units of the People's Liberation Army to completely obliterate the road and cut off supplies to this region. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of claims initially came in that obviously in the Galwan Valley there has been an issue. Chinese have come in at the Galwan Valley, but so there is this defense expert Sneh Ashish Philip who writes for the print, and I think he's given a very good he has a fairly good understanding of what actually has happened there. And he says that China has never crossed the Chinese claim line in the Galwan Valley. Okay, so in the Galwan Valley, there has never been a dispute with regards to the LAC or the claim line. The claim line and the LAC have always been the same. And this is a sort of agreement that has existed since 1962 between the local Indian army and the Chinese People Liberation Army. Okay, so there is no dispute as such. Now, obviously, this area is strategically very important. So there were fears that China might want to take on the higher ridges in these areas. Okay, so some claims started coming in that China has placed a proper foothold in this area, but according to Sneh Ashish Philip, after he's done a detailed research, he says that there is an understanding at the local level, even though no formal maps have been exchanged, and there is no Chinese intrusion in the Galwan Valley. Okay, however, so there is another area that I talked to you about is the Hot Springs area and the Pangong River side. Here the Chinese claim line enters into the Indian territory. Okay, so there is a dispute between the Indian claim line and the Chinese claim line in this territory. Now, what China in its defense is saying that we have only, so even if we have made incursions into the Indian border, we have only come in up to the extent of our claim line. So basically, let's say if tomorrow Indian army enters Aksai Chin, then if China says that, oh, you have invaded China, we will obviously also say that no, we have only sent our army to the Aksai Chin region, which lies very well within our claim line, which is effectively what Nehruji also did with regards to its forward policy. So that's the Chinese claim on that side as well, that we have ensured that our troops haven't crossed the Chinese claim line. Okay, so now, so there is this specific area called Patrol Point 14 and 15 and the Gorga Post, which is 80 kilometers south of the Galwan Valley. Herein the Chinese have come in. Okay, so this is the Gorga Post area. And if you look at this map, this is the LAC that has existed. This is the LAC that India believes is the actual LAC. Okay. However, Chinese claim is slightly towards the left, towards the west here, and Chinese have occupied the Kogra post, which traditionally used to be an outpost of the Indian army. Okay. So herein they have made an incursion, and with regards to Kogra, yeah, with regards to the Kogra post also, this is a 3 kilometer in this thing insertion into this area, right? And so this is where this, so you might see this word crop up in newspapers, differing perceptions of the LAC. So this is precisely what we mean by differing perceptions of the LAC, that the Chinese believe that our LAC is still that region, and India believes that no, the LAC is a little towards you, and this area that lies in the middle is the sort of disputed area with the, and this is where most of the conflict. So this is not the first time that India and Chinese troops have exchanged blows. It's been happening since forever. Remember, I told you that in 1988 also Rajiv Gandhi ji, when he went to China, it was in the backdrop for another incursion by the Chinese troops. So this has been happening in such a manner. Now let's come to, so I hope you are fairly clear about the issue at the Galwan Valley, which apparently is not a big issue at all. And with regards to Kogra Post, where, and near the hot spring regions, where the Chinese have actually come in. Now, the interesting bit and the most important bit is about the Pangong Tso. Okay, so basically means lake in the local language. So Pangong is where there is actual incursion by the Chinese, but herein also it's that the Chinese say that we've only sent troops to our claim line. So anything, and the Chinese have been giving us their claim line since the 1950s. So it's not that the Chinese have put a claim line today. So here also the Chinese are saying that no, we have put in troops because we believe that India had been invading our country for years, and now we're taking this right back, rightfully so, as per the Chinese. Okay. So India says that the LAC starts at finger 8. Okay, so this is finger 8 of the Pangong area. India says that the LAC starts over here. Okay, and and I told you in 1999, when troops were diverted from this area to fight Pakistan, China had stepped in and built a motorable road at finger 4. So even though India says that LAC is here, during the Kargil war, China had moved up to finger 4, and they had built a proper motorable road up to finger 4. So they had used the Kargil conflict to make gains of their own. Okay, and then the on-ground situation is that India dominates finger 2, and India has now been trying to construct a road further, which would allow the soldiers along with vehicles, etc., to move faster, and it would make sure that Indian patrols can easily keep on going deeper into the so-called Chinese territory, right? So India says that LAC is finger 8, and the patrol used to go about finger 4. Okay, so without any sort of opposition from the Chinese, before May, Indian patrol starting, let's say, at finger 2, and then there's an ITBP post here, the patrols easily used to go to finger 5 and finger 6 also, right, without any sort of challenge by the Chinese. If the patrols had crossed finger 6, finger 7, finger 8, then obviously the Chinese side would catch up. And there's a very interesting protocol that they follow at the border. Let's say the Indian troops have come in or the Chinese patrols have come in. These guys will come in, both sides will come in. They will hold up a banner which will read, "You're in Indian/Chinese territory and please go back." And once these troops are there, these troops will easily go back because of the Peace and Tranquility Agreement in 1993, and then the Confidence Building Measures Agreement signed by both the countries in 1996. Okay. Now, the main point of contention as of today is finger 4 area along the Pangong Lake. And the Chinese have now come in up to finger 4, and they have built structures to stop Indian patrol teams from going ahead. Okay. So there are other reports also which say that the Chinese have now moved into finger 2, and there is a proper standoff off at finger 2, and the Chinese troops are not allowing Indian troops to go on patrol or leave, or let's say cross over the finger 2 area. Okay. And the issue is that let's say if Chinese end up dominating finger 4, the problem is that from finger 4 they have a very good view of the Pangong Tso Lake, and in the Pangong Tso Lake there is this post called the Lukung Post where the Indian patrol boats are kept. So Chinese can have a very clear view, and this will be very important to them strategically, let's say in terms of in the times of warfare, right? And now why Pangong Tso region is really important is because in the 1962 war, China made inroads through this region itself. So there is this beautiful movie called Hakikat by wherein there is Dharmender ji acting. I think it's a 1964 movie, and that movie itself displays Dharmender ji fighting at this particular area itself, right? So this is the area that India has to obviously keep in dominate, because if India does not dominate this area, then there is fear that in terms of, let's say, any sort of ground aggression by the Chinese, this will be the point of entry of the Chinese into the Indian subcontinent, right? So this is why this sort of area is so contentious. And so now reports have started flowing in that that senior military commanders of both the countries are meeting, and there are multiple meetings going on, and they're trying to negotiate what happens. I think it's not very wise for us to speculate what exactly is happening, but let's just wait for things to turn up. But this is, so what I've told you here is basically the situation on ground, best known to me. There might be other data that might come up or I might not be aware of. So, Shweta, this is pretty much it that I had to talk about in this lecture about the current border dispute.
You know, Abhinav, I really enjoy how you pick up a topic and you make it so story-like for people to understand with immense clarity. And a lot of people have written, you know, in the chat that very nicely explained, very well done, etc. So I thought I'll pass on those comments to you. It's privately sent to me. Great. So that was it. And also, I will just check quickly on YouTube if you have any questions. We also, for the people who are watching, please feel free to put in your questions. If you have any doubts pertaining to the topic here, or even for the Nepal one for that matter, if there's something that you need to ask, he's a subject matter expert as that, at that. He's done thorough research into it. And please use the chat box. Please use this opportunity to ask any questions you like. I will quickly check the YouTube link as well. Abhinav, there are a few people watching there as well. And from the new pattern perspective, what kind of questions are you expecting with GK? I mean, similar like all those last years, or?
No, so I would expect that, let's say, since it's a border dispute issue, the 1993 Peace and Tranquility Agreement might come up, and the question would be who was the Indian Prime Minister at that point of time, right? And then let's say the question of the LAC might crop up, and then you should know that Zhou Enlai was the Chinese Prime Minister when Jawaharlal Nehru was the Indian Prime Minister. So when I looked at the questions that were there in the sample paper, so they basically give a paragraph, and out of that paragraph you could basically answer 2 questions, but the other 3 questions you're supposed to generally know, and that's where the issue is. So that's why I think reading every topic in depth becomes really important, because your paras won't really help you out there. So you can have so obviously there won't be conceptual questions that what should India's response be, how should India interact, etc. The questions could be very pointed, like who was the prime minister then, and let's say where exactly is the Galwan Valley. Okay, so out of these 3 points, yeah, Shweta?
Do you think it will be easier to handle these questions? People shouldn't be worried about the new pattern.
No, they shouldn't be worried, but they should. So, with regards to international relations, I think they should be worried. They should look at the maps. Very important, right? Because so a very pet question I think could be that out of these, let's say, posts, or out of these countries which have been in the news, which is the easternmost country, or which is the easternmost region, which is the northernmost region? And that's a very easy objective type geography question that you can put in international relations. So it's not strictly an international relations question, but it's a geography question. But obviously when you're talking about international relations, it becomes an important part of that.
Integral part of the.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so that is something that they could handle these questions at ease if they've really, done a bit of map reading and everything. Correct. Any other questions? I have one more. Harshita wants to know, this was a great research on the border dispute between India and China, she says. When will the India-Pakistan relations be held, ma'am? Looking forward. Even I wanted to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next week, I guess.
Okay, great, Arshita. Thank you for bringing that up. And also, interestingly, the speaker has accepted the topic. Why hasn't UNSC taken any action, says Amrita Priya?
Because China has a veto in the UN Security Council, first of all. Second of all, India generally always has stood by the fact that we will handle all issues bilaterally. We don't want any third party to invade, right? Because it gives a sense of weakness, right? That हमसे नहीं हो रहा, China हम पे हावी पड़ गया, आप please आके सुलझा लो. So A, that's the problem. B, obviously then China has a veto power in the UNSC. So that's also an issue.
And also, I would like to reiterate, Abhinav gave that disclaimer. It's all a bit speculative. It's his perspective on the issue, and you must see it in that light. Yeah.
Yeah, so no government sources have said how far Chinese have come with
I just
sending.
wanted to reiterate because they're asking questions, and we don't want any trouble there. They quote us. Also, there is Rajat also wants to ask a question. He says, "Okay, there's an Anupam Pandey. Rajat, we are waiting for your question. Please go ahead." Um, Oh, okay. I think I've. Do you think after this current issue happened all over the world, will UN take any action to remove China from UNSC? It's a valid question, actually.
Yeah, they could, but the point is that for any resolution to pass, you would need China's concurrence. And I don't see China saying that, okay, kick us out of the UNSC. So that might not happen.
That may not happen, Anupam. Sorry. Okay, so Rajat, you can ask the question on the chat as well. I mean, that's if that's all right. He wants to maybe ask in person. Shall I unmute him?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, Rajat,
Hi.
please go ahead.
Yeah, very good evening. Very nicely explained all the topic, and thank you, Losiko, and for bringing expert on the channel. Well, my question is very simple, and where we see India and China relationship in future, because both are uh, a country with lot of population, and China is already developed, and China is definitely the ruling country of the world. So. My question is, do we see by the remotest possibility our Aksai Chin back, uh, or we don't see any such kind of a thing? As per what is your personal thought about it?
See, see, the thing is, like, I want to talk about the broader India-China relationship here. I'd like to quote Mr. Shyam Saranji. So Shyam Saranji is the former Foreign Secretary of India. Him and another very influential author, C. Raja Gopal, C. Raja Mohan, they write Indian Express frequently. They have so they are considered to be the pragmatists in the India-China relationship. So see, Nehruji was idealist. He said that it's the Asian century. Both these countries will work together. Then you had Patel, who was the realist, who said that no, China has always been an irredentist country, which means a land-grabbing country, right? Now, then you had the pragmatists later coming on, along the likes of Shyam Saranji, and they basically at that point in time they said that they gave a two-pronged policy with regards to the India-China relationship, right? So this two-pronged policy says that because we live in such a let's say in codependent world where India and China also need each other at multiple levels, they said that we should follow this policy of co-engagement. Okay, so containment when necessary and engagement when required, right? So we need to contain China when it makes, let's say, territorial incursions into India, but then we also need to engage with China with regards to, let's say, bringing reform in the World Trade Organization, talking properly with regards to the climate change negotiations, etc. So now coming to the question of Aksai Chin, if you put this in the broader context, we can't obviously fight a war with China because it's going to be a very stupid thing fighting a war with China at this point of time, right? Secondly, I don't see any other way how we can get Aksai Chin back from China, right? Because with every increasing day, the conventional superiority of the Chinese with vis-a-vis the Indian state is increasing. And Modi ji had also requested the Chinese in 2015 that let's come to the table, let's talk about our border disputes, let's try to solve this issue. But the Chinese have outrightly rejected it. So as of today, the issue is that China actually maintains the status quo. So as per what the status quo is, that China maintains the effective control of Aksai Chin, right? So it's going to be very difficult for China, for India to get back Aksai Chin. Let me try to say it in this way. The probability of India getting Aksai Chin back from China is almost equal to the probability of Nepal getting the Lipu Lake Pass back from India. So the power relations are also kind of like that, and both the countries realize the strategic importance of this area. What I think can happen at a later date, which might be a political suicide for anyone who tries to make that decision, is that we sort of agree with the bundle pact with China, in the sense that you give up all your claim with regards to Arunachal Pradesh, Tawang, and stop calling Tawang Southern Tibet, and then you take Aksai Chin, which they say is the extension of the Xinjiang province. But it's a political suicide. I don't see any prime minister agreeing to that, then coming back to power. So like honestly, everybody might say that ek din hum Aksai Chin leke rahenge. Home minister also goes to the parliament and says jaan de denge, etc. I think it's very hard. Like I don't see how that'll happen. I think this dispute will carry on forever. It's been carrying on for 40, 50 years. I can see it continuing easily for the next 40, 50 years as well.
Great, great, fantastic. Harshita has a question. Harshita, would you like to come on the mic and ask the question yourself, or should I unmute you, or what do you suggest?
Shweta, also don't mute them. No, you've muted Rajat also. Like if he had something to say with regards to that.
I didn't. Did I do it?
It's showing as muted.
I'm sorry. Rajat, would you like to say something to that? I could unmute you again. It's all right. See, what happens is I'll unmute him once to find out. Yeah. Yeah, Rajat, I've unmuted you if you want to ask something or say something toward the answer.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What you wanted to hear. All right, great. So the next question, Harshita says that also, I guess CPEC has been illegally handed over to China by Pakistan. It is part of POK. So how far is this agreement valid when this POK is still an issue before ICJ?
See, the thing with regards to PO, so it's the same issue with regards to Lipo Lake, right? So Nepal says that you have illegally constructed a road in the territory which is ours. So India also says, so the thing is, obviously, our narrative is that Pakistani occupied Kashmir is illegally occupied. And what Pakistan has done is, it's given the Shakshgam Valley to China as a gift. That's a cool 3,000 square kilometer region that they've given to China as a gift. Then apart from that, they're also saying that there should be an economic corridor passing through that region, which is a larger part of the grand one belt, one road narrative that and project that the Chinese want to establish. Now, I think it's pending in the ICJ, but like I really don't know how to answer this question, right? Because it's more political than academic. अभी कल को कोई PM आके कर दे, so academics can't say anything about that, right? So like I'm really sorry that I can't really answer this. As in, I don't know what to say in this regard. It's a wrong thing. गलती से हमारा land लिया है. The CPEC obviously should not pass through Pakistan.
Correct. So
sorry, not Pakistan. Sorry, India. Gilgit-Baltistan region.
Good
enough. Like what to do?
That's all right. I mean, from a CLAT point of view, we're talking about how to handle these questions.
Yeah, so CLAT point of view, you should know that CPEC exists. Okay, and you should know that it's an economic arrangement between China and Pakistan. You should also know that इसमें इतना $1 billion का loan है. Then you should also know that Pakistan has gifted this area called Shakshgam Valley to China in the Pakistani occupied Kashmir. Okay, and then you should, in the map, should know that where is Shakshgam Valley, what is the route of the CPEC, what are the important cities or in towns that it is passing through. So these opinion-based questions won't come in CLAT. It'll be very factual.
Fantastic. Great answer, Binav. And I hope, Harshita, that answers your question. You know what, I always wanted to ask in the last webinar also, I wanted to know, when did you realize that you have this, that it's not just preparation for CLAT that you did, that you have these, insights into the, real intricacies of the matters and everything. Are you like genuinely, passionately interested in subjects like you talk about countries, like you talk about, anybody would talk about neighbors, or like, let's say, Ekta Raja, Ekti Rani, you have this, it's a wonderful, is it something you enjoy doing? This is
kind of that. I'm also writing UPSC, so political science and international issues is my optional. I really need to do well to get selected, so I have to read it. So basically that. Very honestly, that's the reason.
Yeah, great. So we are helping you prepare better, Abhinav, right?
Yes, I guess.
Harshita says, sir, because the IOA is with India, sir. So all right, ma'am, thank you. Okay, so she's fine with it. Yeah, she's happy with the answer. Great. I think we can wrap this up. It's 7 o'clock. Any other questions or feedback you have for us, please feel free to put it in the chat. One last time, we'll look at YouTube. There's somebody who said, thanks for taking this initiative, Live Law. This is Law Seco, please. We're doing some great work in the field, and especially with these webinars, I can assure you there is nobody who's talking in great detail about current affairs. People only talk about how to handle these questions, how to prepare for GK section, etc. But nobody gets to the the real thing and elaborately explains it. So I think we're kind of proud of you, Abhinav, for doing that.
Thank you.
And for next time, we'll work around any other thing that we really expect will come for the CLAT 2020. Be it Pakistan or anything else that comes to your mind will be great. There's one last message we would like to take. Okay, great job, Abhinav. So that's a lot of compliments for you, Abhinav, today. Thank you so much for taking the time preparing so well.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. All the best.